Starting. It looks good. All right. Yeah. So if it ever freezes, I'll just unfreeze it here and we'll start. Yeah, that'll minimize. Yeah, I'll minimize.
Brilliant. Oh, that's valid. The cross is sitting.
Yeah, it's perfect. Just right. Charlotte tried to move that during her presentation. She couldn't. The cross. You moved all the signs, but you didn't move the cross.
The cross will be with us.
Yeah. Catholic University. What can you
That's
say?
all right. It's
Wait, thank God.
just one sentence.
Prepping. He's prepping. Oh, they're all coming in now.
Are you rehearsing my CV?
Hey, Kelly, can I just confirm that you can hear us from online?
Yes, I can.
Thanks, Kel.
You're going to go ahead and then.
Would you like me to? Ready to go?
Sure.
Hi, thanks everyone. So in recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people, spiritual connection to country, and in continuing with ACU's commitment to reconciliation, it is customary to acknowledge country as we pass through. Today, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the First Peoples, the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways. We thank them for their continued custodianship. We acknowledge and celebrate the continuation of a living culture that has a unique role in this region and all our campuses of Australian Catholic University. We also acknowledge elders past and present and thank them for the wisdom and guidance as we walk in their footsteps. Now I'll just hand over to Professor Herb Marsh. Thank you.
I'm just going to briefly introduce Reinhard because I don't want to take away time from his presentation. And also, many of you already know him, but we're really fortunate that he's here with us, and really are fortunate that we have the association with ACU, the formal association. And Reinhard and I first met in late winter, early spring in Manitoba. We might have met before that, but we were in a guest house there where we were and formed a good bond that's lasted all this time. And so it was wonderful that when we had the opportunity that we could bring Reinhard through here to join us at ACU. Now, I could tell you lots of things about Reinhard, academic and the others as well. But I just was looking through our research performance report, and his contribution to ACU is stellar here. He is on almost half of our recent successful grant as a co-author. Again, the list of publications, the prestigious publications. Some of them he's first author on, a number of them he's co-author on. There's a listing of, I don't know what the category is, but it's the most prestigious journals. Reinhardt's well represented there. Here, this one, Reinhardt is ranked 31st in Australia in terms of research productivity. I think that's across all disciplines. Reinhardt's ranked 5th in the world out of 80,000 education researchers. And he's not actually primarily an educational psychologist. He's probably more of a psychologist. His emotion work cuts across education, of course, but so his work is experimental. His work is longitudinal. He's a methodologist. He's a theoretician. He has lots of practical applied research as well. And he's got the most wonderful set of international colleagues. Anywhere you go in the world, at least in psychology circles, there'll be somebody not only that knows of him, but knows him personally as well. So wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much for these kind words. It is a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be back. It is also an honor to be here for me. Without further ado, I'm going to, as talked about, I'm going to discuss the current status of the control value theory of achievement emotions that I developed over the years. The background is that traditionally theories and research on achievement emotions have focused all through the 20th century, but subsequently also on one only single achievement emotion, that is achievement-related anxiety. There have been exceptions like Bernie Weiner's attributional theory, but by and large, the focus was on this one negative emotion in terms of constructs such as test anxiety, math anxiety, performance anxiety, competitive sports anxiety, and so on. And there are good reasons to do that. It's a pervasive problem in modern society, right? Education, occupation, careers, life chances are made contingent on our individual achievement, which is why avoidance of failure is extremely important for everybody. And by implication, fear of failure is one of the most frequently occurring emotions in achievement settings. Scientific investigation, at least since the 1930s, a multitude of theories have been developed, psychoanalytic, behavioristic, and so on. More than 2,000 empirical studies. And from these studies, we do have, and that's good, cumulative knowledge showing how frequent achievement anxiety is, how it can be measured, that it develops early in elementary school and that stays at relatively high level on an average throughout the secondary and post-secondary years, right? We know how it impacts learning and performance at school, on the job. And we fortunately also know what to do about it in terms at least of individual psychotherapy, right? So typically the effects are detrimental. It's not only frequent, it can be really detrimental for well-being, our health, our cognitive performance, achievement outcomes, then subsequently in academic settings, on the job, in sports. So it is an important emotion. We know a lot then about these vicious cycles of failure on an exam, for example, reduction of self-confidence, lack of motivation, poor study strategies, and then again, anxiety before and during the next exam, right? Anxiety in education settings, we know it can generalize into school phobia, care for attack dog on the right-hand side, care for school ahead, pretty similar, right? It should we go in there anyways. But what about emotions other than anxiety? That's the question we asked ourselves 20 years ago now. Anger, for example, different indicators of anger. Despair, so that's a test of your German language capabilities. I'm drinking this substance because I failed my math exam, right? Boredom, on an average, students feel bored 32% of classroom instruction time. Different indicators of boredom. This definitely is boredom, right? Positive emotions, enjoyment of learning, enjoyment of interacting with peers, excitement when the exam is over, pride. So this is the heuristic variant of pride here. I'm number one, right? and pleasant relaxation after the work is done. So 20 years, 25 years ago, we knew next to nothing about all these different emotions. And the control value theory makes an attempt to explain these emotions, both negative and positive, by considering their individual origins, their social origins, their functions, and their regulation. And what I'm going to do now, this is an overview. Achievement emotions, that's the target group of emotions here, are thought to be prompted by perceptions of control, our control over achievement activities and their outcomes, and the importance, the subjective importance, the value of these activities and outcomes. These appraisals are shaped by the current achievement situation, but also the broader social cultural context. And achievement measures in turn influence our achieved behavior and result in performance, but also our health. Emotions and outcomes are thought to reciprocally influence underlying appraisals and the environment, which then implies that we can target, in principle at least, any of these elements of cyclic feedback processes to manage, to regulate, and to treat achievement emotions. I'm going to focus now on a few core components of the theory: concept and measurement of achievement emotions, basic propositions in terms of appraisal antecedents, implications for the role of social environments, and for learning, performance, and health. So the three major questions I'm going to ask: how can we define and measure these emotions? How can we explain their individual and social origins? And how do they impact important outcomes? And in conclusion, I'm then going to consider a few open problems. How can we define achievement emotions and how can we measure them? They're typically defined as emotions related to achievement activities, such as studying, working, doing sports, or to the outcomes of these activities in terms of success and failure, which makes it possible then to group them according to what we call their object focus, activity versus outcome. But it also makes sense, and that's true for all emotions, to group them according to two traditional dimensions describing human affect, and that's valence, positive versus negative, or pleasant versus unpleasant, and arousal, activating versus deactivating. If you combine these three dimensions, then you get a three-dimensional taxonomy of these emotions: positive, negative, activating, deactivating within these categories, and activity versus outcome. And we have an additional distinction here for outcome emotions: prospective, related to future success and failure, such as hope for success; retrospective, related to past success and failure, such as pride. And the 12 emotions here are just prototypical emotions representing the 12 cells of the taxonomy. It's not exhaustive, there are more than these 12s. We developed an instrument assessing all 12 emotions from these taxonomy, the revised achievement emotions questionnaire, based on the original version of the AAQ that was published 10 years ago. And these are some sample items. I enjoy doing my assignments. I'm hopeful that I will do well. I'm proud of my accomplishments. So it can be used across contexts, not only in education, also work and sports. We used then several studies to test the psychometric properties of the instrument. What you see here is based on a sample of university students from the University of Rochester in the USA. What you see is reliability coefficients, which look relatively agreeable, I would say, and also prime findings from separate confirmatory factor analyses of the different scales, and that looks good as well. And we also use the instrument to test the validity of the overall taxonomy in terms of the relative importance of the three dimensions that make the that constitute this taxonomy. And we use the facet analytic approach that has been developed for this purpose just a year ago by Herb Marsh. And what you see here, valence is taking the major share of explaining variance in the emotional scores. That's always so. Pleasant, unpleasant, that's just a primary distinction in the world of emotions, right? But you also see that the other dimensions, arousal and object focus, and that's two dummy variables here, activity versus outcome, prospective versus retrospective, also explain a major share of the variance, 21%. And the interactions between the three dimensions, another 34%. So the conclusion is all three dimensions are indispensable to understand the structure of achievement emotions. And at the same time, the findings, validate this revised achievement emotions questionnaire. So the conclusion would be for this instrument, reliability and validity. The original AAQ assessed achievement emotions in education specifically. The revised version can be used across different kinds of contexts. There are scales for trait and state achievement emotion. There are domain-specific, age-specific versions, for example, the AAQ mathematics, and it has to be translated in a number of languages, so it can be used. Second question, how can we explain these emotions? How about their origins? And let me talk about appraisals first. That's at the core of the control value theory. So we are here now in this part of the overall framework. The propositions of different appraisal theories of achievement emotions and emotions more generally are complementary, not mutually exclusive. There are contradictions, but basically it's pretty much about complementarity. And based on this situation, the control value theory seeks to integrate the propositions of existing theories, but it also makes an attempt to expand the scope by explaining just multiple achievement emotions, not only anxiety, not only outcome emotions, but activity emotions as well. More specifically, the theory proposes that two types of appraisals are of primary importance for understanding these emotions: appraisals of control over our achievement activities and their success and failure outcomes in terms of causal expectancies of success, failure, right? Causal attributions of success and failure, but also underlying competence appraisals such as self-concept of ability. That's the first group, and the second group is appraisal of the value, of the importance, both intrinsic and extrinsic, of achievement activities and their outcomes. And different types and different combinations of these appraisals are then thought to explain different achievement emotions, for example, expectancies, perspective emotions, causal attributions of past success and failure, retrospective emotions. This might be a typical flow of appraisals in an exam situation. You may first ask yourself, is it possible that I failed this exam, right? And if so, would this be harmful? Is it important? And if so, can I do something about it? And if yes, relief. If no, hopelessness. If I'm just not certain, anxiety. Such a flow would imply that control and value interact in generating emotions. Achievement emotions are a joint function of control and value appraisals. For example, fear of failure would be high when we perceive that we are not in control over what is going on that exam. We think it may at least be possible that we fail, and the exam is important. When we are sure we get an A anyways, or if it's just not relevant, why should we be nervous, right? Enjoyment of learning, high and perceived competence, and the value of learning are high. So when I feel competent to master the material and I'm interested in the material, then I enjoy learning. When I think it's just out of control, I do not understand this text, or I'm just not interested, then learning is not enjoyable, right? I show you a few pieces of evidence, experimental evidence from a little series of studies. I'll show you evidence from a test-taking procedure which looked like that. We announced to high school students, you're going to take a math test, then provided them with sample items like this one, 96, 13, 10, 7 was the next number here, and let them then report their anxiety before this test. Had some covariates in the study. High versus low control, the sample item was either very easy, like this one here, or in fact, and that was a bit mean, unsolvable, right? High versus low value, we told them this, the math test counting towards your final grade, versus these are numbers, there's no assessment of your performance, there are no consequences whatsoever. And what we find is high control, easy sample item, anxiety before taking the test low. Low control, unsolvable sample items, but it just doesn't matter. It's just it's a game. Your performance is not assessed in any way by anxiety low. It's the combination of lack of control induced by an unsolvable item ahead of the test, right? And perceived high importance. We debriefed them right afterwards, right? But high perceived importance of the test that boosted the anxiety scores. Correlational evidence, latent interaction analyses based on a study with, again, secondary school students. Control operationalized via self-concept of ability, value, the perceived value of success and failure, achievement emotions, the AAQ. We use latent constructs of control value and of the interactions between them to predict these emotions listed at the right-hand side. And what you see is there were positive first-order effects of control and on enjoyment and pride, and negative effects on anxiety, anger, and shame. Value had positive effects on all of these emotions. So value is generally an amplifier of emotions, except for boredom. Boredom is an exception, right? But above and beyond these first-order effects, the interaction of control and value also had significant effects for 4 of the 5 emotions. And here you can see how this looked like. For enjoyment, you see control having a positive effect if you can, it's correlational, right? If you can interpret it as an effect. Has a positive effect on enjoyment, but the strength of the effect, the slope here, depends on value. This is low value, this is high value. The higher the value, the stronger the connection between control and enjoyment, and the combination of high control and high value yields the highest scores for enjoyment. Conversely, negative effects of control on anxiety. The more control, the less anxiety. But again, the slope differs. Strong effects with higher value and the highest anxiety scores, a combination of lack of control but high importance of achievement. Now, within personal analysis, you could say this is all based on what I've shown you so far is based on between person analysis, right? Between person correlation to test CVT propositions. I would think it's really important to amend a between person perspective by within person analysis, because effects of appraisals on emotions are located within persons. They represent within person mechanisms in the first place. And we know since decades, right, at least in the 1970s, since the 1950s, if you will, that between and within person correlation can just diverge. So we need within person analysis to more directly examine within person effects of appraisals. And that is true more generally. Our theories pertain to within person psychological functioning is true for self-determination theory, is true for self-concept theory, as at least most of her Marsh models, right? And the problem is we cannot, at least not directly, infer within person functioning from between person variation. Intra-individual correlation between various are statistically independent and can diverge. And I continue to like this simple example here, and this is from medicine, the relation between duration of sleep and the frequency of migraine headaches. I borrowed this from Bernd Schmitz, who published about that in the early 1990s. The between-person correlation here is positive. Those who sleep longer suffer more from migraine headaches, and you would then, as a practical consequence, think, okay, what do you need to do? You need to get up early, right? Don't sleep in. But if you look at what is going on within persons, the relation is negative. Short sleep precipitates headaches, which is just the opposite in terms of practical implications. Okay, so can be non-equivalent. And it's also true for experimental studies between subject mean effects can mask differential effects for different individuals. We need to directly look into what happens within persons, right? We therefore then used an intensive longitudinal study that was originally triggered by the coronavirus pandemic in March 2020 we started, but we continue, and we also just continue. The pandemic was not really over at any point, right? It was declared to be over. We have 46 waves so far. I'm going to show you evidence from the first 12 weeks that included a weekly diary. Subsequently, we continued then on a monthly basis, and it was a representative sample of adults in the UK. We assessed perceptions of control, value, and emotions, and their outcomes in 3 major life domains: achievement, social relations, and health. And I'm going to focus on the achievement domain. Control. This week, I have a greater control over my work performance. Value, my work is meaningful this week, for example. And then we had single item rating scales. How did you feel how do you feel in your work this week? I feel happy, helpful, proud, and so on. We thought that control value appraisals would impact participants' achievement emotions, but we also thought about reverse causality in terms of emotions, for example, through mood congruency effects on memory, would influence participants' appraisals. All right. We use dynamic structure equational modeling, which is a 2-level approach. First level within persons, level 2 between persons. And what I'm going to show you is synchronous within and between person correlations at the same point in time, but then also cross-linked effects within persons over time, effects of appraisal on emotions and of emotions on appraisal. These are the synchronous correlations for 3 exemplary emotions: enjoyment, anxiety, and boredom, with control and value. And what you see here, and this is remarkable, is not always such that relations between variables within persons and between persons are equivalent. Here they are equivalent. So both control and value correlate positively with enjoyment and negatively with anxiety and boredom. And this is true both within persons and between persons. Equivalence of within and between, which is not trivial. Value was positive value, which explains why the correlations here with anxiety and boredom were negative and not positive. Beyond these correlations, now effects over time, and these are effects of control at time -1 on the next point in time. So it is always a lag 1 perspective here, but across 12 waves, right? And we see that there are autoregressive effects, so there's some inertia over time of perceptions of control and also of enjoyment. But above and beyond these cross-legged effects, we see control is having a positive impact on subsequent enjoyment, and enjoyment is having a positive effect on subsequent control appraisals. Conversely, for anxiety, negative effects of control and anxiety, negative effects on control, and boredom, also negative effects in both directions. Value, positive effects on enjoyment, and the same in the other direction, and then negative effects for anxiety, reciprocal, and also for boredom. And I should add, this is so demanding, it's base estimation, and if you go latent, all right, it's so demanding that it is virtually impossible with current methodologies to include more than 2 variables at a time, over time within persons and at the second level. So conclusions, the findings suggest that control and value appraisals impact emotions. Emotions reciprocally influence these appraisals, and it seems to be the case that within and between person findings for these links are almost completely equivalent. Second question, how about social environments? So we are now here in this part of the overall theoretical framework. Let me focus on students' learning environments in the classroom for a moment. The logic would be control and value are the proximal appraisals of antecedents of achievement emotions, which then would imply that any factors that impact these appraisals should also influence students' emotions. And I'm going to focus just on teacher emotions, or more specifically teachers' enjoyment for a minute. So this is a quote from an interview with a teacher that Rosemary Sutton cited. Teaching is almost scary because I've come to realize that my emotions can really dictate the mood of the class and almost how the kids are going to be that day. If I'm in a good mood, it can be a real positive class. And this is the multi-level longitudinal variant of demonstrating the validity of this statement. So controlling for prior student enjoyment in grade 7. This is from a study on students' development in mathematics, Palmer project for the analysis of learning and achievement in mathematics. Controlling for prior student achievement, teachers' enjoyment had a positive effect here on students' enjoyment in math classes, which was mediated by teachers' displayed enthusiasm. Enjoyment needs to be visible for students to have an effect on them. But here as well, it is about reciprocal causation. So students' enjoyment also influences teachers' enjoyment. And the critical mediator is teachers' perception of students' engagement. So visible in student engagement is something that really makes teaching enjoyable, right? So it goes in both directions. Second example, composition of student groups or team members more generally. It would follow from the theory that individual achievement is beneficial and prompts and it increases your positive emotions, reduces your negative emotions, but that the group level of achievement reduces your positive emotions and exacerbates your negative emotions. What is the logic for this proposition? Perceived control, perceived competence are known to promote positive emotions and to reduce negative emotions. Individual achievement, individual successes strengthen perceived control and competence and therefore positive emotions and reduce negative emotions. But the group level of achievement, the group average achievement is known to reduce perceptions of control and competence. And here in this room, everybody knows that. This is known as the big fish, little pond effect, right? Or historically, it was also the frog pond effect. If you are surrounded by high achievers, if you're in a class of gifted students, for example, then your chances to succeed relative to others are reduced. And if you are in a class or in a team, more generally in a group of low achievers, then your chances, all else being equal to succeed, are increased. So group average achievement has all else being equal, has a negative effect on perception of control and therefore should decrease positive emotions, exacerbate negative emotion. This is just the mediator being left out. And what we find empirically, and that also is from the Palmer study on students' development in mathematics, enjoyment in year 5 has a positive effect on students' enjoyment of mathematics in year 6. There is some stability here, but above and beyond that auto-regressive effect, individual achievement is having a positive effect, and this for students' end of the year grades, so they influence students' subsequent enjoyment of math classes, but the class average achievement had a negative effect, and we call this the happy fish little pond effect. I mean, here it would be a reduction of happiness, right? You would need to reverse the sign and the logic. We nevertheless called it, to be congruent with the big fish little pond effect, we call it the happy fish little pond effect. And for anxiety, just the reverse negative effect of individual achievement. So success reduces your anxiety in mathematics, but the class average of achievement, positive effect. And similar for hopelessness, positive effect of the class average achievement on students' hopelessness in mathematics. This was German students, but it generalizes across social context. So this is an analysis Brotherhood has, I hope I pronounce your name correctly, has performed based on TIMSS data across all these countries listed on the left-hand side. And what you see is the effects of class average mathematics achievement on students' enjoyment of mathematics. And down here, you see the effect sizes. The black triangles, that's significant effects. And you see that all of the black significant effects here are on the negative side. So class average math achievement reduces students' math enjoyment across the different contexts represented by all these different countries across continents and also including Australia down here. This is a summary, right? Trust me, the big one says it's better to be a little fish in a big pond. Not sure if this is true, and that was the solution proposed by these editors of a motivation volume. Jump out of the pond, inhabited one on your own, not possible. And it is a conundrum for educators, and the discussion is going on. We learned from recent research that detracking, that could be a possible solution, right? No longer using tracking, streaming, and so on, and grouping students in ability homogeneous classes, that helps. But recent evidence suggests that that does not always help. Detracking is not always beneficial. So there is really a practical issue left to be solved here. All right, outcomes, learning and performance. How important are these emotions beyond just, explaining part of our everyday life in achievement situations? So we are now here in this box of the overall framework. The cognitive motivational model of emotion effects that is part of control value theory makes an attempt to explain these effects. And to explain performance effects is, in fact, sufficient at first sight, at least, for simpler research questions to use two of the three dimensions of the three-dimensional taxonomy, valence, and also the two classical ones. So the three-dimensional taxonomy reduces here to a two-dimensional taxonomy: positive, negative, activating, deactivating, positive, activating, enjoyment or pride, negative, positive, deactivating, relaxation, negative, activating, anger, anxiety, shame, negative, deactivating, boredom. The model proposes that emotions of these four categories impact learning and performance through a number of mediating mechanisms. And this is not an exhaustive list, but we think these are among the more important ones: the availability of working memory resources, intrinsic and extrinsic dimensions of motivation, styles of thinking, and self versus external regulation of achievement behavior. We'll assume that activating positive emotions preserve cognitive resources, focus attention on the task at hand, facilitate intrinsic motivation, and also creative thinking and one's self-regulation. The opposite would be negative deactivating, like boredom, depleting cognitive resource. When you're bored, you start daydreaming, right? Your mind wanders. Any kind of motivation is undermined. Shallow information processing, and also shallow styles of regulation. But the middle two categories are a bit more complex. For example, anxiety. On the one hand, we know anxiety promotes task-relevant thinking. You start worrying about possible failure, right? We know that anxiety reduces interest and intrinsic motivation. But on the other hand, we also know from our everyday experience, if you are fearful before an exam, we may invest extra effort in order not to fail, all right? So there may be positive effects on extrinsic motivation. And also, and that's what we know from memory research, there may be positive effects on some types of thinking. So that is just a bit more valuable for these middle two categories: positive activating, typically positive, but not always. I'm going to show you an example in a minute. Negative deactivating, negative, but also not always. Bit of evidence for one of the mediating mechanisms, modes of thinking. We would assume positive activating, so this is just contrasting positive activating, negative activating, enjoyment and anxiety. We would assume positive activating emotions facilitate a global attentional focus, flexible switching, promote widespread activation and long-term memory, and therefore enhance the use of heuristic strategies and performance on generative tasks, being creative, brainstorming, generating ideas, right? Whereas negative activating emotions would promote a local attentional focus, would enhance control, specific activation and long-term memory, focus on details, and therefore more rigid and analytical strategies, which then should enhance performance on evaluative tasks. For example, the verification or refutation of existing ideas, right? We tested these propositions using an experimental study with university students of mathematics. So these, to quite an extent, were already experts in mathematics. We induced positive, negative, or neutral mood, enjoy finding neutral in these students, and let them then perform a generative or an evaluative task. Both the generative and the evaluative tasks used the same stimulus material. And this was this figure here, generation task, consider an arbitrary parallelogram. This one here, generate as many ideas as possible that describe this type of shape. Evaluation, consider the same figure, right? Please evaluate each statement from the list and decide if it's correct or false. So they were presented with a list of ideas and decide for each of them if it's correct or false. And this is the outcome. What we see here, generation of ideas about this figure, mathematical ideas about this figure, in terms of different indicators of creativity, fluency, originality, flexibility, under the enjoyment conditions, substantially and significantly higher scores than in the anxiety or the neutral condition. But for the evaluative tasks, verifying correct ideas or refuting incorrect ideas, they look quite different, right? Here, performance was substantially and significantly higher in the anxiety conditions. So the implication is, and that's also important really to tell, for example, teachers or coaches or supervisors, the world of emotions is not black and white, right? It is not about just positive, negative, right? Negative emotions can be, under certain conditions, specific types of tasks, can be beneficial. Anxiety can be helpful. Confusion can be helpful, right? But nevertheless, at the same time, and that makes it just complex, right? At the same time, for overall performance outcomes in education, on the job, in sports, it is on average more helpful to experience positive emotions and less helpful to experience negative emotions. And that's what we see from overall correlations with academic achievement, for example, in education. So again, the Palmer study, what you see here across grade levels from 5 to 9, correlations of these math emotions, enjoyment and pride, anxiety, shame, boredom, and hopelessness, with students' achievement in mathematics. And you see the two positive correlate positively with math achievement, the negative emotions correlate negative. And the correlations increase over time. So in year 9 here, 0.45 for enjoyment is quite substantial, minus 0.45 for hopelessness. And that's manifest correlation. So it's pretty strong between students' end of the school year grades and their emotions. Now, in terms of underlying causal effects, you would assume on the one hand, emotions influence learning and performance, but on the other hand, these successes and failures then reciprocally influence the development of students' emotions over time. We tested, yes, that first using a classic cross-like panel model. So you see here a pre-existing positive correlation between students' math enjoyment and their math achievement in year 5. And the critical question then is, are there incremental effects above and beyond the pre-existing effect and the reciprocal effect, the autoregressive effects over time? And this is the case. So enjoyment, positive effects on subsequent achievement, positive effects on subsequent enjoyment. Causality flows in both directions, controlling for covariance. And these coefficients may look small at first sight, but they are meaningful and substantial, and we shouldn't forget that they are incremental effects, right? So positive for enjoyment, negative for anxiety, math anxiety overall reduces students' math achievement, and the same for hopelessness, negative effects on students' math achievement. But here again, one now might object, I mean, this is a between-person analysis, or even worse, the cross-like panel model has been criticized for confounding between and within person variation, right? So here we also then made an attempt to go within
go one level down, if you will, use an Hammer's random intercept cross-like panel model. And what this model then did was we do have latent variables for the emotions over time, manifest variables for achievement over time. We extract from these variables at the measurement level time invariant random intercepts. These are I variables here, and what is left is within persons deviations from the respective person's average over time, and we can then inspect if these within person factors influence each other from year to year. This year's first correlations, you see, no, it's the effects, it's not the correlations. You see substantial autoregressive effects within persons. And above and beyond these autoregressive effects, enjoyment has positive effects on students' grades and vice versa. And we see also a pretty strong correlation here between these latent random intercepts. Anxiety, the reverse, negative effects of anxiety on grades. These effects here are not significant. Again, a strong correlation between the random intercepts. And final example, hopelessness. Again, negative effects within persons of hopelessness on grades and vice versa, and a substantial correlations here of the random intercepts for emotion and achievement. And this is, I mean, different data sources, so it's not trivial, right? It's not common method variance. Okay, conclusions. Emotions impact students' academic achievement according to all what we know. Achievement reciprocally influences emotions. And here as well, interestingly, within and between persons, findings are almost completely equivalent, and there are reasons for that. Okay, finally, how do these emotions impact health? We know next to nothing about the impact of achievement emotions on our health. We could say, so we are down here now, health. We could say that achievement emotions are a component of our mental health, right, from day to day, at least as long as we are in education or employed, right? But we could also speculate that emotions, negative emotions especially, impact physical health through compromising immune system functioning, disrupting sleep, prompting headaches and back pain, and so on. And that's what we looked into using a sample of university students, the AAQ to measure emotions, and a scale on psychosomatic health that compiled a number of different everyday problems, cardiovascular, headaches, back pain, sleep problems, and so on. These are findings from separate latent regression analyses for each of they are multicollinear, so we first did it separately for each of the emotions. And you see that the low control negative emotions, achievement, anxiety, shame, hopelessness, also disappointment, have positive predictive effects on psychosomatic problems. There are three positive emotions here: hope, relaxation, assurance, that have negative predictive effects. You might then think, okay, these emotions preserve health, or they may even buffer the effects of negative emotions. But if we combine all of them, and we did that by creating four groups of emotions: high control positive, low control positive, high control negative, low control negative, you see that the first three groups here, positive emotions and high control negative, which is anger and boredom, zero effects, basically. It is the negative emotion coming with a lack of control, perceived lack of control, helplessness, if you will, that boosts psychosomatic problems. So this was an overview of especially what we found more recently and of propositions of the theory. Let me use the last few minutes to talk about a few open problems. This is an old problem here. Should we use discrete emotions, categories of discrete emotions, or should we use constructs of global affect? So discrete emotions, like in our taxonomy, or global positive versus negative affect. My take is, but it is not sufficiently solved and answered this research question. Both approaches can render valid conclusions. If discrete emotions are functionally equivalent for whatever kind of antecedent or outcome, then it would be sufficient to consider global constructs like positive and negative affect, to lump different discrete emotions together, right? If this is not the case, if they are functionally not equivalent, if they are heterogeneous, then that doesn't make too much sense. Then we need to differentiate. But we do not know under what conditions if there's sufficient equivalence across different positive and negative emotions. A second open issue is, I mean, the world of emotions does not only consist of achievement emotions, right? There are different types of emotions that do play a role in our life. Epistemic emotions related to the generation of knowledge, social emotions, obviously, aesthetic emotions, health-related existential emotions related to health, death, and life, and so on. In emotion science, the current situation is that there are theories that consider common principles across all of these groups of emotions, but disregard the specificity of any of them. And then on the other hand, there are theories that consider single groups of emotions, such as epistemic or social emotions, but do not create the connections, do not make the connections to other groups of emotions. So it's a fragmented world, and I would see we need integrated theoretical frameworks that do both, that integrate both common principles and attend to the specificity of these different types of emotions. And I would propose that control value theory may provide a framework for doing that, and the reason being that perceptions of control and value are fundamentally important for almost all human emotions, not only for achievement emotions. And just one example, epistemic emotions, generation of knowledge. So the prime trigger for epistemic emotions is cognitive incongruity, which can come in different forms. If your expectancies are violated, you're surprised. If you want to know more, there's an information gap. You may be curious. If you're just confronted with contradictory information, you are confused. But in addition to cognitive incongruity, I would propose that control and value also play a role. You continue to be curious if you expect to resolve the incongruity, how long ever it may take. If you do not expect to be successful in the end, your curiosity is breaking down, and the value of information and value of reducing information gap or solving contradictions then also is important, because if you just don't care, you wouldn't be curious, you also wouldn't be confused, you would just let things go and sit the incongruity, let it sit there. Time scales, effects linking emotions and appraisals with appraisals and outcomes. On which time scales do these effects unfold? Is this seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, decades, all of this combined, right? And this is an unsolved, a fundamental issue. It is unsolved in psychology, in developmental science, in developmental psychology. There's a bit of research and thinking about the sampling of times to capture causally active time intervals, but it is just underdeveloped so far. If you miss causally the causally active interval, if you, jump too short or too far, right? Then we may fail detecting effects that do exist. And this has consequences, for example, for panel studies. If effects unfold on short timescales, too short to be captured by survey assessments that we typically use, right? Then should we use contemporaneous effect estimates as proxies? And this is what Beck-Motin has proposed recently, and we are following up on that, and that's spearheaded by her. This would be the classic cross-lagged panel analysis. A has an effect on B, and B an effect on A over time, right? But if the time lag is a year or 5 years or something like that, and the effects that we are interested in unfold on shorter time scales, wouldn't be better off by representing them as contemporaneous reciprocal effects, right? Or should we do both? And that's what we are trying at present. So including both contemporaneous and reciprocal effects, and obviously then you're running into any kinds of estimation problems and identification problems, right? So that's an unresolved issue. Number 4, universality. How universal are basic mechanisms of emotions across persons, across settings, across social, cultural contexts. Assumptions of universality are part of almost all major theories of emotion and motivation, true for self-concept theory, true for self-determination theory, also true for control value theory. If we find that a mechanism is valid for all persons, then we don't have a problem. But if not universal, then we do have problems for non-mathematic psychology, right? How would we explain cases that do not follow our universal pan-human laws? Persons for whom high achievement reduces academic self-concept, persons who need satisfaction reduces well-being. John Marshall likely would say that never happens. Okay. And need for session enhances well-being. Okay, our emotion persons who task enjoyment undermines performance and hopelessness increases performance. All right. We need to inspect these issues rather than just fantasizing about them by integrating non-mathematic and ideographic perspectives, but also perspectives across contexts. And one way of doing that is looking to the between-person variation of within-person effects, for example, using random effects modeling. And I would say that if the result looks like this, across persons, effects on the positive side that just show a different strength, I wouldn't worry too much, right? If there's a little bit on the left-hand side, so in most persons, effects are positive. There are a few persons for whom the estimates are negative, just noise, right? Why should we worry? But if it looks like that, we got a problem, right? What do we do with this group of persons here in whom whatever kind of effect or context, whatever kind of effect, it's just the opposite of what we propose and what we find on an average. Intervention, and this is back to achievement emotions. How can we prevent reduce excessive negative achievement emotions, promote positive achievement emotions? We know for test anxiety, we do have successful treatment methods available. Psychotherapy or test anxiety is among the most successful kinds of therapy. For the control value theory would propose more generally that achievement emotions are shaped by control and value appraisals, which would then imply that changing these appraisals should be a suitable means to target achievement emotions also beyond test anxiety. And there are promising candidates for control and value attributory training, growth mindset intervention, utility value intervention, and so on. And what we also think about is that there may be two groups, group of persons emotionally at risk. Lack of control, generating anxiety, hopelessness, and so on, and lack of value, generating boredom, lack of enjoyment. The existing motivation interventions typically target one of the two problems, right? Which we think then it makes sense to combine the interventions to target both groups, target both control and value. So that's a control value intervention that we are currently, and we are at the end of this study here, EcoWeb, which includes RCTs targeting control value, increases in achievement emotions, and also a number of other interventions across 5 European countries. And we are currently in the process of analyzing the data, and remains to be seen how this control value intervention then is going to work. Conclusions, emotions, critically important for learning performance, but also for health. They are also important outcomes in and of themselves. They are core components of our individual identity and personality development, right? Origins, perceived control and value. There are also implications for practice, but they are open problems, and I just talked about them. Before closing, I would like to acknowledge the support by my doctoral and postdoctoral students. I would not be able to do all of this without their support, right? So these are current and recent doctoral and postdoctoral students. These are colleagues from Europe, and these are cooperation partners from other continents, including some from IPPE. You see here Herb and Teresa and Jesse and Phil, and there are others also. Thank you for your attention. And sorry for taking all the time.
open up for question. Wonderful tour de force. Yeah, one of the things that you were able to show is how you can expand the whole research program and bring so many different perspectives into the research program. It's a wonderful framework that you presented as an overarching research. But let's open it up for questions.
All questions answered.
Or it's too big to tackle. Your typology of emotions, how universal, not universal, how generalizable are they? So, for example, you had, I don't actually have it with me. I didn't write it down, but anxiety can be activating and be deactivating under certain circumstances. How generalizable are those circumstances?
Yeah, so that is really important and also tricky questions, and that's a contentious issue in affective science. Would it make sense to define emotions in terms of discrete categories, and then the term is discrete emotions, right? That having clear boundaries. So one category is sitting here, and the next category is sitting at a distance from the first category, right? And the single categories are clearly defined within a 3 or 4 or whatever dimensional space. That does not work because for most emotions, there are cases that do not fulfill the conditions for what I would say then can be called a prototypical case. So anxiety being activating, deactivating anxiety, difficult. Anxiety can lead to freezing, but then you're still boiling inside, right? So anxiety activating, anxiety being unpleasant. Anxiety can be pleasant under certain conditions, being on the roller coaster, right? I would use a prototype perspective, and I would talk about families of emotions. And within these families, there are prototypical cases, but there are also cases that are less particular, that are at the border of the category. And the categories that in the end may in fact overlap.
So you've got some fuzzy sets.
Fuzzy sets, exactly. Exactly. There is that.
But so I was wondering about your question as to how or which intervals they have to be measured in. And like there's emotions that are only very short-lived, like surprise, maybe, or boredom. Like they will stop after I'm not in that situation anymore. So, and maybe they will turn into something else. So if I reflect upon a surprising moment, I might feel happy now, or I might feel sad, depending on what kind of surprise that was. Or with boredom, I wouldn't even know what I would probably feel nothing, reflecting on a boring seminar or something. But so there are emotions that might have an enduring effect, but emotions that are very short-lived. And how do people take that into account? And how is that even relevant really?
That's another really important question. It's about the decay rates of different emotions. Decay rates vary across situations and across persons, right? But they also clearly differ between emotions. So surprise is a relatively short-lived emotion. What then subsequently follows is, if it is important, it turns then into shock, into anxiety, into happiness, whatever, right? When negative expectancies are confirmed, the resulting emotion would be negative. If positive expectations are disconfirmed, it would be rather than disappointment, right? So there are differences in the decay rates between emotions, but one and the same emotion can show also just very different decay rates. So boredom can be something that unfolds within, in some people at least, within 2-3 minutes. So some of us are really bored very quickly. In others, it takes an hour of dumb work or 2 hours or whatever, a whole day until it really gets boring. And it can then persist
over different lengths of time. And that is true for most emotions. So you can be in an anxious state for 1-2 minutes, but also for days and weeks, right? It's true for anxiety, it's true for boredom, it's true for enjoyment, for most emotions. So the really short-lived ones, that's few, right? Even confusion, I mean, can really persist. But this is under-researched, and the trajectory of intensity over time is also under-researched. It's another issue we really need to look into, because it is also critical then for the definition of when do we transit into clinically relevant states that need treatment. And I'm convinced that the DSM-5 is not the way to go and to define if somebody could go into treatment or not, right? Having mourned, if you lose a loved one for more than 2 weeks being in a major depressive episode, come on, ridiculous. We are using experience sampling. We are also using physiological methods. Experience sampling, I mean, pretends to be real-time and dynamic, but it is not really, because you get these rating scales, need to tick the boxes, right? And in the moment when you see them, you start already, or it can happen that you do already, and you do not need to be aware of it, start already regulating your emotions, and your response then does no longer depict reality, right? So experience sampling is in between. Physiological analysis is more at the real-time side. And it's about combining these methods, and then it's, I mean, then aggregating about different granularities, which is tricky.
Emotion, the process of complex context influence to the order. Yeah. So there's no any other mediator. So do you think that is it possible they can just develop any mediator between context and the emotion?
I mean, the control layer theory will propose the mediator is our perceptions and appraisals, right? I need to perceive the environment, and I need to interpret it before it can unfold an effect on our emotions. I didn't show you the evidence. I mean, we are having this hour and not much more, right? But we do have evidence that appraisals are a mediator, but there are also processes where it is more immediate, where in fact there are minimal mediators. You need to perceive the environment, you need to perceive the other person, but then there can be a very quick process of mimicking another person's emotion, and this is in the literature targeted under the term emotional contagion, right? And that is really pretty immediate within fractions of seconds. We are currently looking into teacher-student interactions, emotional interactions, in terms of mimicry within fractions of seconds, using videos of classrooms. And then no appraisals come later. This is too quick to be mediated by appraisals.
In your there is evaluation or appraisal, but I also think that there is some other variable, which is dissatisfaction or frustration. So,
such as
reaching needs satisfaction. So
yeah,
in the context of satisfying my need, then
yeah,
I enjoy.
yeah,
I
yeah.
enjoy.
But you first need to perceive that the need is satisfied. You need to see that first. The need satisfaction per se, if you don't perceive it, if you're disconnected, for example, due to brain injury, disconnected from your reward center, right? Then there are no effects. So there is something in between. Perception, appraisal is in between, I would say.
In relation to Teresa's saying, the issue with decay gets really complicated because the effect, like boredom, for example, that might only last a few seconds, but you know, you see a trailer for a television series, and the trailer, you say that's boring. Well, you know, that ends, but you never go back and watch that. So the effects of
Exactly.
boredom are long lasting.
Exactly.
And boredom, if you're bored in math class and you don't have any choice about whether to be in a math class, then you're going to be bored again and again and again, day in and day out. I mean, boredom at any one day may not only last a little bit, but it'll be a long time. So the whole issue of time scale is really tricky.
Yeah, I agree. And you may remember, and then with the re-experience the emotion,
Yeah.
but you can also have then second thoughts. So having been surprised by something, you can remember the surprise and then trace the situation in a different way next time, right? So there can be second order emotions and obviously meta cognitions about emotions or meta emotions. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm off base here, but I'm sort of thinking about emotion and achievement and how people are feeling these emotions when they're worried about achievement and the strategies that people use outside of the school environment to manage their own emotions, such as music listening, for example. And so, for example, if you're bored in a class and you leave the class, you might put on some music that's really upbeat. And you're managing your emotions, and you're also getting control over your environment because you're controlling your environment to make you feel a certain way. I'm just wondering about that, controlling your environment outside, how that impacts upon those relationships.
I mean, if you control the environment of being a high school student by leaving class, then you are impacting your situation or context. And if you are truant, then over a longer period of
I
time.
didn't mean truancy. I meant like just your general experience. I didn't mean leaving the class. So, for example, if you're studying, you might listen to music, even if you're bored, and that might make it less boring.
Right. The problem being in our education, and the same is true for the job to quite an extent, you cannot apply all emotion management strategies that would be fruitful and would help you. So, I mean, if you think about these, what I displayed was basically 4 different types of strategies: selecting and changing the situation, right? Changing your thinking, changing the emotion itself, and increasing your competencies, right? And the first category, selecting situations, you may not be in a situation where you can really engage in doing that, because the situation, if you are an 11-year-old boy sitting there in class, has been predefined by your parents, your teachers. You need to attend, right? So there are only a few possible strategies left. So that's the first point. The second point then is it makes sense to think about it from a medium and long-term perspective. And I would say this last category of emotional regulation strategies, increasing one's competence, that is especially important for achievement emotions and achievement settings, because it can then bring all the positive emotions that come with success and prevent the negative emotions that are prompted by failure, right? So my proposal would then be, if you will, so James Gross in his model is having these regulation categories of situation selection, situation modification. I would say he would subsume that, but I would still say it makes sense to talk about person modification also. So you can make an attempt over time to change your own makeup, your personality. You can change your personality to an extent over time. The intervention is doing that, or at least attempting to do that, and you can change your competencies.
whereas directly targeting the emotion, listening to music, it's short-lived, right? And often, I mean, if you try to do that by suppressing, for example, just the expression of the emotion, then as talked about before, then you may still boil inside, and the effects may be pretty devastating. So this changing the situation, increasing your competencies, and if useful, if needed, changing your thinking, and I mean, there are boundaries to that, right? It would not be realistic to change my thinking in a way that I would then be a future Nobel Prize winner, even if the reason her, I mean, if there would be Nobel Prize in education, we would have a partial winner sitting here. Okay, but there is no Nobel Prize in education. There's no Nobel Prize in psychology. So there would not be it. There are boundaries to changing thinking. It needs to be realistic. It makes sense if it's optimistic, but there are boundaries in terms of realism.
So one last question before we wrap this up. Online there. Reinhard.
Yes, I would agree. So the question is establishing whether there's a generalizable effect or rule with a complementary person-centered analysis reveal if there were any paradoxical type profiles. Yes, but I would submit that this term person-centered is a bit misleading because what we call in education research person-centered is group-centered. In fact, it is not centered on individual persons. And I would just say this can be used for strategy, but we need to go one level down and really look into individual persons in the first place, right? And can then make an attempt to create groups of persons based on what is going on with individuals.
Thank you. All right, so thank you very much. Thanks everyone online, and thank you very much to Professor Pekrun. Thank you.
Thank you for the discussion.